reciprocals.
I've heard of this before.
Okay. So here's what I need you to think about first of all.
Wait, I remember this.
Good.
From 8th grade.
If
It's not a good
things are opposite, so like if I said, what is the opposite of 2? What would you say? Negative 2. What if I said, what's the opposite of negative 6? 6, okay? So opposite means your positive becomes negative or your negative becomes positive, okay? Change the sign.
Oh.
Does anyone know what a reciprocal is?
A sign. Number.
What is it? Like
A number.
The denominator and numerator, and they switch?
Yes, we flip it over, right? So if it was A over B,
A fraction.
it becomes B over A, right? So you just flip them. Max, you taking notes back there? Yeah? So flip it over, okay? Opposite, change the sign. Reciprocal, flip it over. Okay? So here's what you do. If you look at this first one, okay, just like what we did yesterday, actually, scratch that. I want to give you a couple examples. Let's say my slope is 1/5. My perpendicular slope then, okay, this means perpendicular, by the way. That's the symbol. Okay, this symbol, this upside down T, is the symbol for perpendicular. Okay, so I'm saying the perpendicular slope from 1/5. So if I have 1/5 and I want to make it the opposite reciprocal, what's the opposite of 1/5? That would be the reciprocal. The opposite is a negative 1/5, right? And then we flip it over. So a -5, right? These two numbers are opposite reciprocals.
But didn't you like double opposite? Like you kind of like, because like you did the opposite of that would be -5 over, or 5/1, but then you'd have to.
The opposite would be
opposite it again.
no. So here's, if this is 1/5, the opposite of 1/5 is a -1/5, right? Just change the sign.
Oh, it's not.
The reciprocal of that is a -5/1, which is the same as -5.
But you said that A.
Because it has to be both these things. It has to be an opposite and it has to flip over. So whatever our number started as, we change the sign, make it the opposite of what it was, and flip it over.
But you said like if it was A over B, so like 1/5, then it would turn into B over A, which is 5.
We have to do both of these things.
Oh.
It has
So
to
it's
be an
not two.
opposite and a reciprocal. Yeah.
So Miss Rubin, so if
It's
it
a
was
pretty bad friend.
2/6, we would change it to a -2/6, and then it'd be -6/2, which would be -3.
Yep.
That makes a lot of
Yeah. Okay, so how about this? If I have a -2/3 and I want the perpendicular slope to that, what's the perpendicular slope to -2/3? 3/2. A +3/2, right? Those are opposite reciprocals. What if I had -6?
+6/1, or like positive.
So this is currently like a -6/1.
All fractions.
1/6.
1/6, right? Flip it over. So if it's a whole number or an integer, you put it over 1 and then you can flip it over. Okay? Okay. So let's take a look at this because this first one is just like we did it yesterday. You're just looking at the slope differently. So -4, 2. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4 to the left, 2 up, puts you right here. 0, -4, 1, 2, 3, 4, puts you here. Pretend I hit the line. Okay, so that's our first line. Our second line is -5, -3. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3. And 4, 3. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3. Let's see how close I can get on. Oh, so bad. Better. Okay, so your graph should look like that. Now, in order for lines to be perpendicular, What do we need to know about these two lines? They cross, but what do we have to know? What part of them do we need to know? We need to know their slopes, right? If their slopes are opposite reciprocals, then these are perpendicular. So the question is, are these two lines perpendicular? How do we figure that out?
We count the slope.
We count the slope. So we're going to start here on the orange one, okay? We're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 down. So that's a -6. And then we're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4 over. So it's a -6 over 4. What does that reduce to?
-3/2.
-3/2. And you always want to reduce it. Okay, so our orange line has a slope of -3/2. Okay, then look at our maroon, if you will. Okay, this one you're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 up. And then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 over. So rise over run would be 6 over 9. What does 6 over 9 reduce to?
1 and 3.
Close.
2.
2 over 3, right? So both are divisible by 3. So this would be 2. This would be 3. So my purple line has a slope of 2/3. The question is, are those two lines perpendicular?
Yes,
Why?
because if you were to do like the opposite reciprocal thing, it would be 2 over 3 would turn into -3/2.
Yep, so we would say yes. These are opposite reciprocals. Okay, you could also check if they're perpendicular by multiplying them together. When you multiply them together, they should always equal -1. So if you want to multiply them, you get -6 over 6, which is -1. So that's another way you could check it. Opposite reciprocals will always multiply to a -1. I think it's easier just to see if they're opposite reciprocals, but if you like to multiply, go right ahead. Questions on that? Okay. For this one, they didn't give us a picture. Do you remember the slope formula? How do you find the slope of a line?
Why?
There's a y. y2 minus y1, right? Over x2 minus x1. That's how you find slope. Okay, so if they give you points but no picture, you can either graph it. If you want to graph it and count it off, go for it. But then you got to find your own graph paper to do it with. Or you could just use those points and find the slope of each line. Okay, so if this one is x1, y1, and x2, y2, let's find the slope of that line. So what goes first?
-1.
-1
-7.
minus 7. y2 minus y1 over x2, which is 3, minus x1, which is 2. And it's really important, you guys, that you label these. Because if you don't, often people get their numbers mixed up and that doesn't go well. Okay? So make sure you label x1, y1, x2, y2, and then plug it into that slope formula. So let's simplify. What number do you get on top?
-8.
-8. What number do you get on bottom? A +1. So you get a slope of -8, or I don't care if you leave it like this, -8 over 1. That's the slope of the first line. Now look at the second line. Okay, second line is going to use this as your x1, y1, and this as your x2, y2. And then we're going to plug that into the slope formula. So it's going to be y2 minus y1, so that's 7 minus 6 over what? It's y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. So what's x2 minus x1?
8.
It's 8
Plus 2.
Minus negative.
minus negative 2, which is plus 2, right? 8 minus a negative 2 is 8 plus 2. So if we simplify that, 7 minus 6 is 1. 8 plus 2 is 10. So I get this as my slope. Can you reduce 1/10?
No.
No. So here's your two slopes. A negative 8 and a positive 1/10. Would you say those lines are perpendicular?
No.
Why not?
Because they're not opposite reciprocals.
They're not opposite reciprocals. So we would say not perpendicular because they are not opposite reciprocals. Okay, so you can either find the slope with this, right, plugging it into the slope formula, or you can find your slopes by just counting it off on a graph. I don't care which one you do, but a lot of the time they'll ask a question like this where you don't have a graph to do it on, so you might just have to use your own graph paper if you want to do it on a graph, okay? Okay, last two, and they're the same two. It's just practicing it twice. So this one says, what is the equation of the line perpendicular to this line that goes through this point? Now, yesterday the question was, what's the equation of the line parallel to that line that goes through that point? When it was parallel, what did we do? We kept the slope the same, right? Same slope to be parallel. So what do we have to do with our slope now to make it perpendicular? Negative, or change the sign, right? Positive to negative, negative to positive, and flip it over, right? We need an opposite reciprocal. So look at your equation right now. Okay, here's your equation of the line we're currently working with. What's the slope of that line currently? 1/5. Okay, that's the only thing we care about in this equation. None of the rest of it matters. This is our slope. So we want our perpendicular slope to be what? If the slope right now is 1/5 and we want to be perpendicular, negative what?
5 over negative 1, or 5 over 1, negative 5.
A negative, right? 5/1. So it was 1/5. Change the sign, so make it negative. And then 5/1, which really, if you want to just call that -5, I'm great with that. Okay, so now you have a point that's going to be your x1, y1, and a slope that's going to be -5. And we're just going to put that into point slope form. Remember, point slope form is y minus y1 equals m times x minus x1. Okay, so let's see if we can lay that out. Y, is it going to be plus or minus right now? Minus what? A -4. So if we're going minus a -4, that's going to be plus a +4. What's m?
Negative 5.
The -5. And then it's x minus, what's your x1? 15. Okay, so we're just taking the pieces that we have and we're dropping it into that equation. Let's do it one more time. Okay, so this last one, it says, what is the equation of the line perpendicular to this line that goes through that point? What is our new, nope, check that. What is our current slope in this line? What is it? It's 1, right? If there's nothing out in front of your x, it's a slope of 1. So my current slope is 1. None of the rest of this matters, just the 1. So what is your perpendicular slope going to be?
-1.
It's -1, right? If you think of 1 as 1/1, flip it over, it's still 1/1, make it negative. So your perpendicular slope is going to be -1. Does that make sense? Flip it over, still 1. Change the sign, a positive became a negative. Max, you should be writing all this down. Write it down with me. Okay, so I have my new slope and I have my point. What are we going to call our -4? x1. And what are we going to call our negative 1? y1. Okay, so I have my point, and I have my slope, and I'm going to plug it into point slope. You don't have to rewrite this. It's right here, but I'm just going to rewrite it so you can see where things are going. Okay, so if this is my form, then I'm going to say y what? Minus
No, I mean, plus one.
minus a negative 1 would be y plus 1, right? Here's your negative 1. So it's y minus a negative 1, which would be y plus a positive 1, equals what?
Negative one.
Negative 1 is your m, and then it's x
Plus four.
plus 4. Minus a negative 4 is x plus a positive 4. So y plus 1 equals negative 1 times x plus 4. Okay, now can I show you something? If my question, instead of saying make it a line perpendicular, if I said it's a line parallel to, what's the difference? If I wanted to be parallel instead, it would be this exact same equation, y plus 1, x plus 4. The only difference is I would use the current slope of 1, right? Instead of the opposite reciprocal slope, which we're not doing today, but I just want you to see how it compares to yesterday. They're the same equation with just a different slope. Okay, so the process is really identical. Just change your slope. Okay, speed run. You ready? Tell me the perpendicular slope.
Negative 5 over 4.
-5 over 4. Tell me the perpendicular slope. 1 over 13. Change the sign, flip it over. Tell me the perpendicular slope.
Negative 17.
1 over.
Negative 1 over 17. Okay, tell me the parallel slope. 2 over 7, right? If they're parallel, the slopes are the same. What would be the perpendicular slope?
Negative 7 over 2.
-7 over 2. Okay, so keep that in mind. Parallel stays the same. Perpendicular, opposite reciprocal, but that's the only difference. Good on that? Okay. Block day this week, we're just doing a review together because on Friday, you're going to take a quiz over just 3.7 and 3.8. So that's all the coordinate plane stuff, finding slopes, point slope form, slope intercept form, finding parallel lines, finding perpendicular lines. Okay, so we'll spend the block reviewing and then take a quiz on Friday.